Hello everyone, this is Łukasz Gandecki from Zolvio, and today I want to show you how you can deal with randomness in your tests. So let's say we have a function that welcomes our user with a random message, and we want to write a test for that. So if we just have the simplest possible test that we can think of, let's say expect welcome user cache to equal and then hello there. We need to import. So the test passed, but now it failed, right? So and it's kind of expected. It will sometimes pass, it will sometimes fail. Oh, if you don't know Wallaby, the green dots show a passing test and the red show a failure. So now it says expect hello there Łukasz, but received Hudem or in Łukasz. And yeah, and that's because it just picked a different one this time around. So this is obviously not a test we would like to have. So what are our options here? One thing is that we could mock Lodash, and I have a different blog post about how you can use test double to mock dependencies like that, but that should be always your last option. That tends to be messy. A different way we could do this is we could say I will take a second argument here called sample that will by default be set to the Lodash sample. And I have to use whatever is passed. So that didn't change anything yet, but it gives us the ability to pass a custom sample. So we can say sample is a function that takes array to get sample from, and then it returns first element from it. And then if we pass it to this function, then you can see that now it will pass every time. So this is a nice little trick that I frequently use, especially for things like ID generators or samples or sorting arrays. And it works great if you can test your code cleanly with unit tests. But sometimes that's not enough. Because if you are thinking about integration tests or end-to-end tests, let's say the welcome user is an internal function that's used by a React component. So in the test, you don't really have a choice to replace a dependency passing in a separate argument. So what you can do then is you can decide that you might want to have a custom sample function, and that function will in production code just use the Lodash sample, but in your test it will just return the first element. So the way to do this, we can do import Lodash, and then we export our own sample. We use generics here. The generics are here, so TypeScript will keep the correct type. So if you are passing an array of strings, it knows to return an element or a typed string. So we can say here, if test environment, then return the first element. Other cases, just return this. And then in your code, you just import this sample, and you don't pass anything here. So now this is actually still failing for us randomly, and that's probably because we need to set the test env here to true. It has to be string. And now if we restart Wallaby, we should have a success every time. And again, this is very useful if you want to run the whole application, no matter if it's a server, backend server or a front-end application. You could say during tests, like let's say you use Cypress to do an end-to-end test, and you might have the same problem, right? Like you might have things randomly showing up on the screen. It's very hard to do any kind of assertions then. So that would solve the problem for you. And interestingly enough, we can use a very similar pattern here to work with dates. This is something that I've seen people struggle in many projects where you could have an application display different things depending on a date. I mean, that's a very typical case, I would say. So let's say on Monday, it shows information related to Monday, right? And again, that makes testing much more difficult. So you could do something very similar. You could say, you could use a function around your code called getCurrentDate, and that would return a hard-coded date for test environment and a current date for everything else. So I have another case that I wanted to explain to you or show you guys. And this is based on a real life situation that we've had very recently, where we needed to have a function that would return a random number between 0 and 10. And the reason that we needed that was we wanted to randomize delay for processing data. So let's say we were getting a batch with hundreds of files every 30 minutes uploaded to S3, and then we would have a event happen when there's a new file uploaded to S3, and those events would fire up lambdas to process the files, basically, and then like insert things to database. The problem with that was that caused huge spikes, obviously. So we wanted to create a queue and introduce a random delay to spread things a little nicer. And we had a developer write a little function. We can do this here. Here a little number function that was called getRandomNumber between 0 and 10. Very nicely done, smart code here. And then for tests, he realized that the function actually returns different things every time. So he thought it will be very smart to just say that, hey, I just want to make sure that the function returns random things. So I want to say actually not to equal, right? And then just to be super safe, he also added 2 more expectations that the result should be bigger or equal to 0. And that it should be smaller or equal to 10. And he had everything passing. The problem obviously started very soon, because the same test would randomly fail on CI, causing obviously upsetting people. This is one of the things that you don't want to see, that you push a small change to repository and then the build fails after 15 minutes on something completely unrelated. So obviously if we reload the test a few times here, oh, you see, it's not even that often. It's probably the problem is based on the fact that it's hard to decide what to test actually here. And it was a smart idea to start with that, well, I want to make sure that it generates random numbers and that they are between 0 and 10. It's almost like this is defining the specification. But it doesn't take into consideration the fact that once in a while it will generate the same number twice in a row. So we can use a similar trick to the one that we used in the original example. And we just need to realize that we don't want to test the Node.js built-in random number generator, which is what we are kind of doing here. What we want to test really is this piece of logic. And to test that piece of logic, we can replace the math random with optionally passing a number to the function. If the number is not passed, that's what will be happening in production, then the function will just get a random number from the math random function. But in tests, we can now do much nicer testing. So we can say it returns a number between 1 and 10 proportionally based on the passed random number that is between 0 and 1, because that's what math random will possibly return. And then we can start writing our test. So we can say that, if the math random returned 1, then we expect the result of that function to be 10. If it was 0, then we would expect the result to be 1. If it returns 0.5, then we would expect this to be 5. And if, just to test some more complex case, you can say that it should be 2. So as a side note here, usually I would recommend just using Lodash random or any kind of a helper library that you're already using that provides tooling like this. It's not worth implementing your own. And one reason is the one that we actually just saw, is that you might mess up tests, you might mess up the implementation. There is no reason to implement things like that over and over and over. The reason why when it might be a good idea to do so, to implement a tiny piece of code like this, is, for example, when you write a Lambda function, and you don't use any external dependencies, maybe besides the built-in AWS SDK that you don't have to pack and upload. It's there for Lambda functions to use. So in that case, maybe your Lambda is 20 lines of code and has 0 dependencies. You don't want to add a build step just so you can use 10 lines of imported code from Lambda. That would be possibly silly. if you already have the build system prepared, that it's easily builds all the dependencies, packs them, and uploads them, and you are working with tens of different Lambda functions, then at that point it might be as well worth just installing Lodash and importing the random function from Lodash. Okay, I think that's it. Please let me know if you have any questions. I hope you will find the examples here useful.